Assistance Center, and I'm delighted to moderate today's UNGA High-Level Week side event, From Words to Action, Our Common Agenda and the UN75 Declaration. The event is co-sponsored by the Coalition for the UN We Need, also known as C4UN and formerly UN2020, and Club de Madrid, Global Women Leaders Voices for Change and Inclusion, the Global Governance Innovation Network, and the UN Permanent Missions of Costa Rica, Jordan, Nigeria, Qatar, Senegal, and Sweden. I wish to thank in particular to Monique, to Fergus, Jeff, and Dan from C4UN, and also to Richard and our intern, Jerry, for their valuable support with organizing this event. So why are we here today? Precisely 1 year ago, the UN's 193 member states adopted a declaration on the commemoration of the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, which outlines a vision for the future and 12 distinct commitments addressing the world's most pressing threats and opportunities. This milestone UN75 declaration also called for the Secretary General to, I quote here, report back before the end of the 75th session of the General Assembly with recommendations to advance our common agenda and to respond to current and future challenges. And following extensive consultations with member states and other stakeholders over the past year, the much anticipated Our Common Agenda report of the Secretary General was just released on September 10, which stresses throughout that in light of current global and overlapping challenges that we're facing, humanity has to make an urgent choice, going for a breakdown or a breakthrough. Now that the report is out, we have gathered representatives from the Executive's Office of the Secretary General, member states, civil society, to advance a discussion about how the recommendations presented in the Our Common Agenda report can best catalyze action for taking forward the UN75 Declaration's 12 commitments. During this discussion, we would also aim to identify where Our Common Agenda, or as we call it, OCA, might benefit from additional perspectives and propose strategies for a more inclusive, stronger, reformed, and reinvigorated United Nations that can deliver on the promise of the UN75 Declaration. And finally, and this is also an initial discussion on how to mobilize UN member states and diverse non-governmental actors worldwide to explore modalities for initiating a meaningful follow-on process leading up to the 2023 Summit of the Future as proposed by the Secretary General. We have a rich program ahead. We will start off the event hearing from the head of the Our Common Agenda team, Mr. Volker Turk, who is the Assistant Secretary General for Strategic Coordination in the Executive Office of the Secretary General. Mr. Turk will only be able to stay with us for the first 30 minutes, but we are lucky to have Michelle Griffin from the USG as well stay with us for the remaining part of the program, and she has kindly agreed to take questions from the public at the end. So thank you, Michelle, for that. Following Mr. Turk's presentation, we will hear reflections and responses from 3 member states, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Costa Rica, and Sweden, and 3 civil society representatives. I would introduce them accordingly at the beginning of each segment. Just as a quick logistical note, we do encourage everyone to submit their questions using the Zoom's Q&A box. And also, I do encourage all of you to use the chat box to discuss and share reflections, your own reflections on our Common Agenda report. Now, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Turk, who will share some of our Common Agenda report's main highlights. Mr. Turk, I must start by congratulating you and your team for bringing out this roadmap for the future. The report covers a lot of terrain, from new concepts, for example, a new social contract and networked and inclusive multilateralism, to more pragmatic policy, operational, normative, and institutional proposals for strengthening the UN. And in addition to highlighting these proposals, it would be great, Mr. Turk, if you could also share what are next steps in terms of the Secretariat role? What would require the consent or further deliberation by member states? And maybe what role do you see for civil society moving forward? Do we need to garner support to make sure that there is a follow-on process? And were you pleased with the number of member states that expressed thus far the need to initiate a post-OCA process immediately after UNGA? So I'll give the floor to you for the next 15 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Christina, and thanks very much for organizing this event, which is great. It's good to have during this high-level week of the General Assembly a number of very important side events such as this one, and I'm really very happy that and very thankful that you have actually dedicated it to the common agenda and to the follow-up of the common agenda. And let me share with you a couple of reflections, then some highlights of the report, but also what's the follow-up and what's the future of it. A couple of reflections. You know, when the UN was founded it was founded before 1945 because the discussions were ongoing for quite a number of years, even before the actual foundation of the United Nations in 1945. I mean, we were in a very different world. And we were in a world that, as you just emerging from the horrors of the Second World War, from frankly a devastating war that cost millions of lives, that displaced millions of people, where human rights violations, genocide were part of many years, where inequalities had risen. I mean, it's a very chaotic, catastrophic world. And from that, you had this realization by leaders at the time that they indeed need to do something about working together in a different way. And the focus was, as you know, in the Charter, very much on peace and security issues, on issues of development, on issues of human rights, and also international law, and if you like, a rule-based system that puts rule of law and international rule of law at the center of it. I mean, 75 years later, we have seen how this institution has evolved, and I think it's important to bear that in mind in discussions today, because sometimes we hear, including by political leaders, so what's the UN for? And why do we need the UN? And it's sometimes a little bit surprising to hear it from political leaders, because at the same time, we know that especially among civil society, among young people, there's absolutely no questioning about the relevance and the importance of the UN, because of course, those of you and us who work together on so many issues, we're not curtailed by short-term political electoral cycles. We are in for the long term, and the long term is what the UN can offer in this perspective. And I think that's also where there is a very strong point of convergence, and we are the reminders of the long term. We are the reminders and the custodians of those generations that are expected to be born, including of young people. And I think that's a very strong perspective that comes through in the common agenda itself. So 75 years later, a minor miracle, and kudos to Anna Karin and the Swedish PR and the the permanent representative of Qatar, Alia, for having chaperoned the UN75 declaration at a time when, I mean, even geopolitical rifts were more pronounced than they are today. Of course, that is still the case, but there was definitely a time where some of the geopolitics was very difficult. The member states leaders came together to adopt the 75 declaration amidst the pandemic, which was probably one of the biggest global challenges that we in the international community and the multilateral system has faced. So that's, I think, again, a very important point. Amidst this, the question was to the Secretary General to produce this report. And we deliberately and very consciously wanted to walk the talk when it comes to inclusivity and making sure that we capture the wisdom, the collective wisdom that is out there. And we have definitely, and it's quite interesting to look at how many individuals and groups and so the civil society organizations were involved in the preparatory process. We had about 38, give you some statistics, we had about 38 thought leaders. We had 6 eminent groups participating, and the Club de Madrid and President Turk is with us as well. I mean, and plus the elders they gave incredibly thoughtful and very important contributions to this process. We had 200 plus young people across the world in 40 countries who participated, who shared with us their thoughts and also their concerns and their wishes. We had 1,700 civil society actors from 100 and hello. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, it was just an interruption. Somebody unmuted their mics.
Okay, sorry, I thought. Yeah,
no problem.
147 from 147 countries. We had a whole network of sessions with member states, informal sessions plus 2 formal ones, and of course we had within the UN system a real enthusiasm among the different parts of the system to contribute. So I think there was, if you like, a very thorough process of consultations, of listening, of collecting ideas. We had hundreds of ideas that came in. We synthesized them. We did the analysis that you see in the Common Agenda report. And that also, in many ways, dominates a little bit some of the debates that we have now in the general debate. But also, of course, you could see it with the speech that the Secretary General gave yesterday to the General Assembly, which really is about, we have to change course. COVID is a wake-up call. We have this inflection point in history, either breakdown, breakthrough. We need to go to the breakthrough because everyone wants a breakthrough. There's probably no one who wants a breakdown, except for those who may benefit from it, but they are certainly a small minority. So how can we actually get this done? And that's what really the Common Agenda report is about. It's about, first of all, a 360-degree analysis of the state of the world on many fronts, covering almost every aspect of humanity and the state of the planet. And it then comes up with these 90 recommendations and proposals that are extremely important. And as you can see from the report itself, it circulates, it revolves very much around the social contract, the importance of a social contract, of the renewal of a social contract, which probably was quite daring, to be honest, to actually put forward what some would see as something that is within the realm of member states and so forth. But we also know that if the social contract is not resolved or is not taken seriously between and among people and between people and governments and institutions, it has international repercussions. Whenever we look at crisis situations today at fragile contexts, often it has to do with the social contract, including the social contract at the international level, because we also are, of course, and that's a very important part of the report, the whole huge issues of inequity that have been laid bare during the COVID pandemic, especially when it comes to the vaccine issue. And the fact that we have an oversupply in the industrialized world in the global north and a shocking failure when it comes to distribution of vaccines in the global south. And that has been, especially for the Secretary General, one of the big concerns and failures of the multilateral system to come together. And despite the fact that we actually have a tool, the COVAX facility, WHO, which is, by the way, multi-stakeholder. It's WHO, it's Gavi Alliance, it's many others who participate in it, and we have that tool available. So why not use it to the fullest and make sure that 70% of the world population get vaccinated across the world, and make that a real rallying cause. So the social contract is very important, and the inequity issues that we see at the international level, and you have been hearing the Secretary General talk especially about the climate action front, about the need for the 100 billion funding for climate adaptation, the financing of climate action, again, a huge point that comes up in climate negotiations and especially ahead of COP26. The other important area, which is well, we have heard proposals, of course, in the past, is to take into account the longer term perspective of future generations and what we owe to future generations and to young people today. And there are a number of proposals around a repurposed trusteeship council, which is an institutional intergovernmental proposal. There is this idea of a special envoy for future generations. There's the idea of a futures lab. There is the idea of a strategic foresight report that the UN would produce every couple of years, precisely to make sure that we know what type of future we can expect if certain things continue, but also the type of future that we can expect if things actually fundamentally change. And I think that's an incredibly important part as well. Then the report talks about the global commons and, if you like, a repurposing of global commons for global public goods. And it goes into the areas that we know are so important to people around the world: health, the socioeconomic system, the climate action, the triple planetary crisis and finding a way out of them, the digital side with the huge digital divide that we have seen, but also the global, the outer space issues and areas around peace and security, with a number of proposals: transforming education summit next year, a World Social Summit in 2025, but importantly in 2023, a summit of the future. So that gives us, I would say, almost less than 2 years, because it would probably take place during the high-level segment of the General Assembly in 2023. And that's an incredibly important process, because it really puts to the intergovernmental side a huge challenge of analyzing, based on the Common Agenda report that the Secretary General put forward, what are the global public goods that require addressing, that require better cooperation, that require better financing, and what type of multilateral governance arrangements do we need to set in place to find fixes for it. We have seen it certainly in the health area, but also in the economic area. We have seen it during COVID, with the whole relationship with the international financial institutions, the special drawing rights issues and so forth, where you have seen a very closer collaboration. But then with the proposal that there would be a regular summit at heads of government, heads of state level between the G20, the Economic and Social Council, the Secretary General and the international financial institutions. So really trying to address those issues head on. Then there are, and that's the last point, there are a number of proposals in the report that go directly to the UN system, to what we can do within the remit of the authority that was given to us by the member states, to the Secretary General, to the different agencies, funds and programs. And in terms, because you asked in terms of follow-up, it's when you look at the 90 proposals, there are those that can be acted upon, frankly, immediately by us, by within the system. And because they are within the authority, within the mandate of the organization. But then there are, of course, a number of those where indeed it is upon member states to take them further forward. And we just hope that the Global Agenda report is an inspiration for member states, for civil society, for thought leaders, for people out there to see how we can address some of these big challenges, play with the solutions that are offered, come up. I mean, we should rise to the challenge, even with better ones, if of course, and really struggle to forge a world that builds its inspiration from the Charter, but advances it and evolves it in a way that is responsive to the challenges that we face today. And that's really what the Common Agenda report is. As the Secretary General mentioned, it's the beginning of a process. It's not the end at all, but it has to be very much kept alive as an inspiration, as a dynamism in the discussions, and especially around multi-stakeholderism and partnerships. And you mentioned civil society. I think there are very strong portions on civil society in the report, including both for the UN system, but also in relation to intergovernmental processes, to make sure that the issues of today's world, and that's really the difference to 1945, we know that so many different actors out there are incredibly important to find solutions. Just look at climate action. Of course, governments, very key, and member states, but we also need companies, we need the big banks, we need the young people, we need the whole community in civil society around climate change and triple planetary crisis to act. We need them to come together to find the solution to these big issues. And that's what the report is about when it comes to inclusivity, participation, more networked and effective multilateralism. So thanks very much, Christina.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Turk. We very much appreciate the broad overview and the fact that you've been able to pack so much into just less than 15 minutes now. I know that I have to turn to Ambassador King pretty quickly, but I do have 2 questions from our audience that I'd like to pose to you very quickly, and you can, be as short as you wish in your responses. I have a question from Dr. Daisaku Higashi, professor at Sophia University in Tokyo, Japan. He says, congratulations on the imaginative and forward-looking Our Common Agenda. Particularly, the reports call for a highly consultative intergovernmental process leading up to a summit of the future in 2023 to adopt many of the report's recommendations. He asks, how do you see the engagement of activists, scholars, and other representatives of civil society in this process? And could you share further details on the role and substantive contribution of the Secretary General's proposed high-level advisory board on the road to the 2023 summit? And then another quick question from Mayara Foley, who's a co-founder of Plataforma CIPO in Brazil. She asks, how will our Common Agenda's recommended summit meetings and institutional changes translate into real action and tangible progress for the people in my region? I suppose she references Latin America in her case. And does your report speak to strengthening the UN's relationship with regional bodies in Latin America and elsewhere? Very quick, if we can have your thoughts on these 2 questions, would be great.
Very quick. So in the report itself, when it comes to the Summit of the Future, a preparatory process is foreseen, and the preparatory process is a multi-stakeholder one. So it's clear that, obviously, very importantly, there will be an intergovernmental track. There will be a track of involving, again, in this way that we prepared the report, all the other stakeholders, civil society, thought leaders, other groups. And then there's this high-level advisory board where we are still in the midst of thinking through what this actually means for the Summit of the Future. But we also need to see a little bit more some of the reactions that we get both from member states and other actors. So we are still in the midst of preparing for that. On the summits, Alicia Barcena, who, as you know, is the head of the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, I just saw her last week, and she said for her the Common Agenda is really important to land in her region, but where, of course, as you know, the analysis shows that inequality is one of the highest in the world. And she first of all has contributed herself to the report, but it's clear that the report itself is going to be a huge inspiration for the type of work that ECLAC, the UN country teams, are going to do, especially around renewal of social contract issues. When it comes to the summits, Transforming Education Summit, with all the data that we have seen during COVID, it's critical that the future of education with the different actors is put to the fore, that we think about it, that we actually make sure that there are some very concrete actions coming from it that make a difference in access to education, including from a gender perspective, because we still have a huge gender gap. But the same with, of course, with the Summit of the Future and with the World Social Summit. I'm sure that President Turk will talk about it, because it was one of his strong ideas to have this World Social Summit that I know has also been picked up by member states. So thank you.
Wonderful. No, thank you so much. And I would just say that I've really very much appreciated the diversity of the proposals. There's many of them, of course, but also the conceptual advances that are being put in the report. I even wrote a piece on the different conceptual advances, and I'm very much, very much appreciate the idea of the new social contract and what it entails in terms of addressing inequities, in terms of the social protection floors, that we need to have at the global level, given the fact that so many billions of people are not protected by them. The issue of trust, I like the fact that there is a big emphasis on intergenerational justice and also the proposals that are being put in this context. And of course, as a civil society, very much appreciate also the idea of networked and inclusive multilateralism. And you will expect us to push for a little bit stronger and more ambitious ideas in that regard as well. So thank you, Mr. Turk, for joining us today. I know you have to leave, and we're going to have Michelle stay with us for a little bit longer to take questions from the audience. I will now turn to the other segment of the discussion, I know that all the ambassadors have a packed schedule. It's UNGA week, so I just want to make sure that people are joining us. Ambassador King, if you can turn on your mic, it'd be great. And then I see that we also have the ambassador of Costa Rica join us. And I believe the ambassador of Sweden will also join us in just a moment. Everyone is coming from other meetings. But let me start with Ambassador King while everyone is continuing to join us. So Ambassador Inga Ronda King is the permanent representative of St. Vincent and the Grenadines to the United Nations. I will also have alongside her join us Ambassador Rodrigo Alberto Carazo Zeledon, who is the permanent representative of Costa Rica to the United Nations, and I believe he's also on the screen. Bienvenido, embajador. And of course, also Ambassador Anna Karin Eneström, who's the permanent representative of Sweden to the United Nations. Before we start this segment, I'd like to remind everyone to share their questions in the Q&A box, and we're going to take them at the end. Ambassador King, the Secretary General's report noted that we need a global economy that works for all in order to deliver global public goods. He proposed as Mr. Turk also referenced, a biennial summit between the members of the G20, the Economic and Social Council, the Secretary General, and the heads of international financial institutions to work towards a more sustainable, inclusive, and resilient global economy. You've been a former president of ECOSOC between 2018 and 2019, if I'm not mistaken. What is your view on this proposal, and how can we ensure that it promotes a more equitable and cohesive economic governance? And maybe before responding to this specific question, could you start us off by briefly sharing any insights with regards to how small island states see the report of the Secretary General? Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. And let me also say thanks to Mr. Volker and congratulate him on an excellent report, which I know he was the driver of. Are you hearing me?
Yes, we are very well. Thank you.
All right. Well, the Secretary General, Christina, and I'll try to address your question quite succinctly at the end, because I did have an ECOSOC focus in my little presentation this morning. But I'll begin by saying that the Secretary General, in his address to the member states at the opening of the general debate yesterday, said that we are at the edge of an abyss. And I think we all agree. We are indeed moving in the wrong direction, and we need to do better. Now, our common agenda, an agenda for all countries and peoples, is an undeniable and long overdue imperative for the countries and peoples in the global south who sit precariously on the peripheries of this lopsided international economy. A collective political effort to tackle the entwined challenges of underdevelopment and insecurity is indeed urgently needed. For small island developing states, low-lying coastal countries and atoll nations, many of whom are on the verge of climate-induced extinction, a conscious global solidarity and action is required to strengthen our sovereignties, and advance our development prerogatives and safeguard our continuing material existence. Within the global north, the angst of growing inequality is also widely felt, and our common agenda allows for the scope to tackle these insecurities as well. But all this we know, and our purpose here today is to inspire action. So the SG's report is quite wide-ranging. Well, not quite, is a very wide-ranging document indeed. Much is covered. But what stands out for me is the fact that the social contract is in jeopardy. And Mr. Volker underscored that earlier. People no longer trust their institutions to deliver what they need. Yesterday, I met with a young architect and professor who is doing great humanitarian work on the Turkish side, on the Turkish-Syrian border. He has designed and built a community center for the Syrian refugees with very limited resources that create space and opportunity to put Syrian refugees to work. It is an impressive, innovative project that addresses many of the political issues between the two sides. It was built quite inexpensively and has immense potential to restore dignity to refugees. But there are gaps to be filled to capitalize on this initiative. He needs help to scale up, and the United Nations should have tools to bridge these gaps. There are myriad projects like this around the world. People are trying to do their bit. They're actually innovating, creating, finding solutions, and across the world, in SIDS, in the global south generally, and in the global north. While I was president of ECOSOC, the clarion call came from the youth saying, we don't need ideas. We have ideas to solve many of our problems. What we need is your help to scale up these projects. We need your help to scale up. And so we don't need, I see Maria here, and that was our fight. We were on many platforms hearing this. So you have asked about ECOSOC's role in implementing this agenda broadly. I'm going to deal with it broadly because I take a little issue with summits because they have limited scope, and that's the proposal on the table for ECOSOC to have that summit, and which is a good thing. And I was reading another assessment of it, and we have to contemplate what summits actually do. But what what I want to say, I see ECOSOC as having playing a central role in facilitating our common agenda and catalyzing action broadly. And of course, the economic space is a critical one, and it was one of the foundational purposes of ECOSOC. So there is scope for us to catalyze that. But I want to look at some low-hanging fruits that have so much potential. The Youth Forum and the Partnership Forum come to mind. This year, the Youth Forum attracted some 19,000 participants via the VTC. Young people still look to the United Nations, and we must not disappoint them. We need to listen to them. We need to stop speaking about them and begin including them in our discussions and our platforms. And Christina, you know, I've said this on a platform that we shared at another time. They have told us that they do have the ideas. We need to help them. And of course, that's where financing comes in. But we have to become more creative. And so the Partnership Forum within the ECOSOC needs to do better. It needs to do more, but it does exist. So we don't have to reinvent the rule. We need to do better in bringing, to be more creative and strategic in bringing connecting the right people, the people with the ideas and the people with the money. So we need to broaden our scope and find more constructive ways in engaging businesses. Of course, I conclude by endorsing the report's recommendation to appoint a special envoy for the future. I like the idea of exploring how to refashion trusteeship. There have been many discussions during the pandemic around this very notion, and it should be put to use, I think, to address many of that. It should be put to use to address many of our non-military challenges. So indeed, people must not be left to sink or swim, not at a time when the mantras of leaving no one behind and building back better exude fervently across the United Nations. So with that, I'm sorry that I too have to leave, and I hope I didn't overstay my welcome on the platform. But all the best for this. Is an excellent initiative. What we need is action. And we do have the United Nations does have the tools, but we need the will, and we need to bring people closer. That was Maria's mantra when she was president of the ECOSOC. That's what we need. If we do one thing, if we find a way to bridge the gap between the institution and the people it has been built to serve. So thank you very much, Christina.
No, thank you, Ambassador King, for joining us. I know it's a very busy week, but we've appreciated your reflections on the report as a whole, and also for sharing a personal story that you had and a personal example, which kind of like it's good in these instances because it grounds up, because as the Secretary General said, even during his presentation of our common agenda, global governance is an abstract term. It shouldn't be. It's precisely what this is. It's about bringing people together. It's about solidarity. It's about creating better tools maybe, but also, as you said, making better use of the tools that we have available to enhance the system for the people. So thank you so much for that and for joining us today. I know that Ambassador of Costa Rica, I'm not really sure if he was able to join us yet. I know he's on his way to join us. But I do know that Ambassador Anna Karen Enestrom from Sweden has joined us. Ambassador, if you're with us, would you mind putting your video on? Let's see, or maybe Monique from Tech can help us with this. There you go. Thank you, Ambassador. I will now turn to you. So Ambassador Enstrom was one of the co-facilitators of the UN75 declaration, and it was an arduous process, but it's great that we've managed to have such an ambitious declaration at a time actually when we saw that multilateralism was actually in crisis. It feels like that is behind now, but we do have to make sure that we're not taking it for granted moving forward. So allow me now to turn to you and turn to you with a more specific question about what the Secretary General terms as the, I quote, global public good of peace. He recommends in our common agenda a new agenda for peace based on a better understanding of the underlying drivers of conflict. In what practical ways do you believe this new agenda could be distinguished from the original path-breaking 1992 agenda for peace? And of course, any additional reflections that you have on our common agenda, on the way forward, we're very much welcoming you to share those as well.
Thank you very much, Christina, and great to be with you. And I'm sorry I missed the start of the meeting. I had to be in the Swedish Parliament discussing Dag Hammarskjöld and his civil servant civil servant work. But let me first say that, of course, 1992 is very different from 2021. And I think, I mean, if we look at the global environment 1992 and the global environment 2021, we see that we now have truly global challenges that which calls for really strong multilateralism and international cooperation. And I think that's why we also were successful in the UN75 declaration. And this is, of course, something that is very, very strong in Secretary General's our common agenda report, and also in his statement to the General Assembly yesterday. One thing that was important in the 1992 Agenda for Peace was the notion of peace building. And of course, that's the peace building notion started there, and we've then seen the Peace Building Commission being established in 2005. And I think this is the Peace Building Commission is, of course, a key institution within the United Nations, and it's also an institution that brings different actors together, and therefore is also sort of answering to what we now talk about as networked multilateralism or more inclusive multilateralism. But Christina, if you allow me, I wanted to say a few words about the women and girls agenda, because I think this is key for the peace and security. And then I'll conclude with a couple of words on peace building. I think, I mean, I represent the feminist foreign policy, and of course for us it's key that we do put the rights, the representation, and the resources of women and girls at the forefront. And we do that not only, but that's of course really important, the solidarity and the support to women and girls. But we do that also because we see how important the participation and the empowerment of women, 50% of the world's population, is for achieving sustainable peace. This is key. This is also about hard security, and we really need to enhance our work when it comes to putting the women and girls at the center. And I think we have all seen how we have backtracked on gender equality during the pandemic. We have also seen that there is a lot still to be done when it comes to implementing the 1325 resolution on women, peace and security. And we see that we have not, so many years after that resolution was adopted, we still see that we haven't dismantled the structures that is actually preventing women and girls from participating truly in today's society. And I think what we are seeing in Afghanistan right now is only one example, but an important example of that. I just wanted to give a couple of things what I think is important when we work with the women's and girls inclusion in the peace and security agenda. First, we need a leadership that is accountable. As I said, I mean, I represent a feminist, not only feminist foreign policy, but also feminist government, where actually every minister in the government is accountable for gender equality, needs to put on his or her gender glasses in every decision that is taken, and work for equality and human rights of women. Secondly, as I said initially, we need both the protection of women, but we also need the participation of women, and that goes for all levels in the society, both when it comes to the development, but also the peace and security agenda. And the third aspect is the funding, because we need to fund gender equality, not only with more money, but also in a better way that is more predictable, flexible, so that those working both within the UN system and civil society can plan their work and do what they need to do when it comes to the gender agenda. And maybe the last thing to say is that we need to have a sort of a new negotiating table where we bring in a new, not new, but we would bring in partners like the women's organizations, like the youth, and like civil society, much more than we have done before. And I know that Rhonda spoke about this as well, so I will not dwell on that. Just a few words on the peace building. Because peace building, of course, is key for a sustainable future. I mean, you know how hard Sweden has worked, not only for peace building, but for prevention. And of course, these two notions are connected. Prevention, peace building is also to prevent countries from relapsing into conflict, and there we need a really holistic way of working with peace building, and that goes for bringing in all the actors that can support countries when they move on their way to a sustainable peace building. And I think there the Peacebuilding Commission does not only is not only unique in the sense that it brings together actors from outside the UN. I mean, you have the UN, you have the financial institutions, you have the civil society, you have the governments themselves, you have regional organizations, but it's also that it's bring the UN system together, the Security Council, the General Assembly, the ECOSOC, and also the field organization of the UN. So I'm very fond of the proposals in the Secretary General's Common Agenda report to expand the role of the Peacebuilding Commission when it comes to geography, but also when it comes to subjects to be discussed, to give the Peacebuilding Commission an extended role when it comes to horizontal issues like climate, women, peace and security, civil society, and other issues. And the very last thing I want to say is, again, on the financing, because financing is of course key for the UN system, that we also need to look into how we finance the peace building work in a better way than we do right now, with more adequate and effective peace building. And Sweden has taken an initiative here of it's called the Good Peace Building Financing, on how we can enhance the role of the Peacebuilding Fund, which is of course key when it comes to the UN's activities in supporting countries, and how we can make that fund equipped with more adequate and flexible funding. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ambassador Ennerstrom. I do have a follow-up question. I must say this because as a member state, we know there are, as Volker Turk said, 90 proposals out there. There's a couple of processes, a couple of summits that are being emphasized in the report. We know that there could be some intergovernmental processes to take these proposals forward. We also know, and I believe I'm not mistaken here, that Sweden is part of the Leaders Network. What are your hopes for the follow-up process? What do you think it needs to happen in order for the Secretary General's recommendations to really come to life in the next year?
Well, I think, I mean, the Secretary General has put forward a very important report about the future, and I think that we all, as member states, need to support the implementation of this report. And as you mentioned, my Prime Minister has, together with the Spanish Prime Minister, taken the initiative of a group of 12 countries, and my friend Rodrigo Costa Rica is also part of that network, because it is important that we do mobilize the political will and the political support to the implementation of this report, which is really about our common future. So I hope for political mobilization in capitals for the implementation of the report. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador Ennerstrom. I'd like to turn now to Ambassador Craso Zeledon, permanent representative of Costa Rica to the United Nations. Bienvenido, embajador. As mentioned, you are part of the Leaders Network, I believe, as well. but then you, alongside Denmark, have convened a coalition known as Unmute Civil Society. The calls to action coming from this coalition seek to make UN processes more public, reduce the digital divide, create an annual Civil Society Day, and appoint a special envoy for civil society to work for civic space at the UN. The Secretary General focused quite a bit on both the digital access part, including a global digital compact, and civil society participation, including calling for civil society focal points in all UN entities. What excites you about these proposals, and what do you hope to see in terms of next steps?
Well, it's very, very glad to be here with you, to be here with my distinguished colleagues, Anna Karin and Rhonda, and also to speak after Assistant Secretary General Turk has introduced his fruit of so many months of hard work and so many interviews, so many consultations across the board. We were very happy to be involved in those consultations and in that process. Yes, this, 90 proposals or so, too many processes, silos all over the place, with a necessity to articulate all of them to make synergies happen and to go one step further into believing and firmly being convinced that in order to attain the SDGs, governments cannot do it alone. They need the participation of civil society, they need the participation of other basic actors within each one of the societies. I've been here at the UN for a bit more than 3 years, and before the pandemic broke our ranks 18 months ago, I was very ashamed every time that civil society was participating in one of our meetings, back there in the bleachers, and finally got the possibility of speaking for 2.5 minutes, five representatives. This is absolutely not the way to go. A full involvement of civil society, unmuted civil society, occupying places in the table together with women, together with girls, together with the youth, the youth, which should be all of them, women, girls, youth, boys, fundamental actors in the making of this system for the future. So that's why we are involved with Denmark and other countries, as well as with Sweden, as well as with St. Vincent, in trying to make things happen within the system, trying to get civil society to participate in all of these happenings.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. We very much appreciate the fact that Costa Rica is such a champion of civil society inclusion and participation at the UN. The C4UN has been advocating in the past year for a civil society champion at the UN at the senior echelon. We also have had a couple of other campaigns going around, and we know that there is a huge support for this proposal and others as well. So we really hope that we can work with you and with other missions to be able to create that space and really make bring from the conceptual stage the networked and inclusive multilateralism to the actual pragmatic stage. So thank you very much for your support.
Just that, yes, civil society deserves a bit more, much more than 2.5 minutes at the end of the different meetings that we have, much more than that, and none to mention this absolute silence to which it has been reduced after the pandemics, well, modify the modalities in which we meet at the UN. So let them in, let them be unmuted, and we will be ready to receive the best inputs that come precisely from the society.
Okay, well, then we will probably create an unmute Zoom button at the UN.
Yes,
so that we can click on it whenever we want to enter the UN and have our voices heard. Thank you so much for that. Speaking of civil society, I'm now very much pleased to turn to the very last segment of the discussion, to our 3 civil society representatives. Of course, with 2 of them actually having wore other hats in the past. I have with me Nudara Yusuf, who's a youth coordinator for the Coalition for the UN We Need. I have Mr. President Danilo Turk, former president of Slovenia and president of the Club de Madrid. And I also have Mrs. Maria Fernanda Espinosa, who is the president of the 73rd session of the UN General Assembly and also is a co-chair of the Coalition for the UN We Need. And because I'm really, really eager to get to the discussion on youth and future generations, which received a prominent place in the SG's report, I would like to start with you, Nudara. You have led many UN75 youth consultations over the past year and heard from hundreds of young people around the world. For advancing the UN75 Declaration Commitment 11 on youth, the SG's report makes several proposals, including the establishment of a dedicated United Nations Youth Office in the Secretariat, a special envoy for future generations, a declaration on future generations, and repurposing the Trusteeship Council to give a voice to succeeding generations. What is your view on these proposals? And do you believe that there are meaningful steps to account for the interest of young people in future generations?
Let me first start by, hitting the unmute button, as Ambassador just said. And thank you so much for Christina and for the opportunity to speak amongst such brilliant global leaders. I really do appreciate that this is a step in the right direction with having the youth voices heard in these forums. I'll get right to your question about, as Mr. Volkerturk outlined, one of the key pillars of the OCA is focusing on the future. And let's start just by acknowledging that this is the first time as an international community, we're collectively thinking about the type of ancestors we want to be. This is good. It's like waking up one day, having a midlife crisis, deciding, oh gosh, what have we done and what are we going to be doing? It's good that humanity collectively is finally having that crisis moment, albeit a couple decades of climate crisis, several economic meltdowns, and a pandemic later. Right? However, I share the same fear as many young people that I've had the privilege of speaking with. We live in a world of symbolism, whether it be posting a black square on Instagram, retweeting a hashtag, marches, or indeed the many, many online events that we see. What we need to start doing is going from aspiration to action. Now, the OCA clubs future and youth into one pillar. Whilst both have a common agenda, each acts through different and distinct avenues. So if you'll allow me, I'll quickly pick these apart. The OCA mentions the integration role of the youth office, but it needs to go beyond this to make that transition from aspiration to action. If I can tell you one thing that young people have been saying for years now, and what I've heard as I've interacted with so many brilliant young minds, is that youth want access. And this doesn't happen by intra-UN integration or the creation of more silos within the UN system. It happens when member states start to take young people seriously and create concrete mechanisms for us to engage with these youth officers and special envoys and whatever other forums are out there. So then let's talk about the special envoy for the future, repurposing of the trusteeship council, and the more strategic foresight side of things. Now, as Mr. Volkerturk said, impact analysis and scenario analysis, these are great. It helps us, look at the different visions, the what it could be and what we currently are heading towards. But people listen to facts and they understand stories. And young people happen to be in growing up and being born into a digitized marketing-based world, fantastic at generating these stories. So really what we need to see is having this kind of integration of young people, not just within the youth office, but also as they work with the Special Envoy for Future Generations, the Trusteeship Council, and the High-Level Advisory Board as it heads towards kind of the Summit of the Future and the World Social Summit. And crucially, what we need to see is as these initiatives pan out, as we kind of see their implementation and execution, we need to see a genuine representation of perspectives. The youth and the future, neither are homogenous groups. We need to consider that whilst this is our common agenda, it affects each of us, matured, young, unborn, women, men, global south, global north, differently. And in trying to be inclusive, we needn't forget this particular nuance when we talk about implementation, when we talk about policies, when we talk about how we're going to engage with the international community. And finally, I might be so bold as to say that none of this will matter, the discussions, the narratives, or the outcomes of the envoy, the trusteeship council, or the youth office, if, as Ambassador Rodrigo outlined, we fall into this sinkhole of silos in the multilateral system. We need their work to be mainstreamed in the work of the UN, and especially as we see in the Summit of the Future and the World Social Summit. So specifically here, we're looking at what the Youth Envoy comes out with in their report on how these policies will be integrated within the larger UN system. And I think crucially then is when we'll understand if this is just yet another symbolic gesture. So to conclude, I think this is a case of the OCA is giving us these avenues, it's giving us a vehicle for change, but we need to latch onto this. And this doesn't happen just by youth, but also by youth alumni who are now kind of leading the international systems. We need to genuinely consider access. We need to fear homogenization of these groups. We need to mainstream work done to avoid yet another symbolic gesture. Just because we're young doesn't mean we'll be satisfied with a couple likes and retweets. Thanks so much, Christina.
Oh, thanks so much, Nodar. I loved absolutely everything that you have said. As I still consider myself a youth, maybe a young person. I don't know.
Definitely.
But I will come to the point where I'll be a youth alumni, and that would, I would remember that I have to pay forward and also pay back and make sure that I'm not forgetting my roots and the fact that I've been a youth activist for the longest that I've known myself. I really like the idea of going from aspiration to action. And I think if there's something that young people are consistently asking the world and the UN to do is to really go more, live more the talk and do more of the action. And we're ready to do that as young people. We just need to be led to do that. And this is why we need these new mechanisms maybe, but as you said, we need mechanisms that are not going to create more fragmentation and silo even more young people at the UN and not only. So thank you for that. I will now turn to President Turk. And President Turk, I would like to go back to this idea of how we can bring to life a new modernized social contract that would help advance a more just post-COVID-19 recovery and economic policies that consider the realization of human rights as an end in itself, rather than one channel to just achieve high economic growth levels based on outdated metrics. And in his report, the Secretary General has endorsed Club de Madrid's proposal for a World Social Summit in 2025. In connection with the 2030 Agenda and COVID recovery, what would this summit seek to achieve? Moreover, what what could be its relationship, maybe, if any, with Mr. Guterres' call for a biennial summit between the members of the G20, the UN, and the heads of international financial institutions? I'll give the floor to you. And if you could unmute yourself, or maybe I can ask Monique. Excellent.
Well, thank you for invitation to this very interesting discussion. And I'd like to say I'm speaking today as president of Club de Madrid, which is former presidents. You see, these are people, around 120 from all parts of the world, who were representatives of states before and now are not. So we are enjoying being in civil society again. And I can tell you that that's a very good thing to be, because it allows you to reflect upon past experience, but in a context of realities as they are and as you see them as a civil society member. Now, let me first say why I consider this report, our common agenda, an important report. The Secretary General emphasizes the need for concerted efforts. And the report is important because it shows a very clear vision of how these concerted efforts to achieve an international system that delivers for the people and the planet should look. Now that means that the current system, international system, not only the UN, but system more generally, is not delivering for people and the planet. And that concerted effort is needed to make this concerted effort possible and reality. And the Secretary General offered a vision of how to do that. And all these proposals obviously constitute that vision. Within that set of proposals, one has to discern a sense of sequencing of things. You know, there are certain things which can be done quickly, other things which can be done a little later or should be done a little later. So, for example, the high-level advisory board could and should be established soon in order to refine the ideas, make specific proposals, and help coming to the decision-making points. Then, obviously, the biennial summit meetings between G20 and ECOSOC could also happen fairly soon, because this is an idea which was discussed in the past. And then one has to understand that G20 is essentially a crisis management mechanism. It did, of course, discuss more thematic and long-term questions, but never succeeded, never went very far in that regard. So its value is really in crisis management. And of course, one would expect that this idea, if accepted, should start working soon. That would help G20 also to gain a broader legitimacy through the United Nations, through ECOSOC. Now, the World Social Summit is proposed to take place in 2025 after, many things are done already, after the international community will be able to see what works and what doesn't, where the problems are. Now, currently, the situation is very bad. I mean, when it comes to world social situation, 120 million pushed into poverty, 130 million exposed to chronic hunger and malnutrition, 32 million children at risk of never returning to school, and so on and so forth. These are the effects which are already here, and they are likely to get worse. And the immediate steps that are expected have to address that. By 2025, it will be very clear where we are. And it is important to take stock of the situation, to see what policies work, which do not work, and provide a place and an opportunity to design the kind of strategy and steps for the future. And that, I think, would be the purpose of the World Social Summit. And obviously, ideally, in 2025, World Social Summit could also identify the way post-2030, because by 2030, we will see how much of the Sustainable Development Goals are implemented. We now know that they are not going to be realized the way they were initially designed back in 2015. But by 2025, we should be able to say, all right, this is the realistic path post 2030. So these are the kind of things which the World Social Summit can accomplish. And let me conclude. The world social situation is getting worse. It is likely to continue to deteriorate. The problems of income inequality are dramatic and are not likely to be changed in the near future. So deliberate effort to improve social situation globally is needed. And for that, of course, 2025 would be a good year to make a decisive step. But this is what I can say at this point. But of course, I'm sure there will be many discussions, and very importantly, it is for the member states of the United Nations now to figure out how exactly do they want to organize the process. I mean, the Secretary General responded to the request of the General Assembly. Now the Assembly has to say, all right, here is your vision with many concrete ideas, and here is how we want to go about them. And that, of course, is the next step we are waiting for.
Oh, very much appreciate your additional thoughts and reflections, and explaining a little bit more the World Social Summit, and very much hope that Club de Madrid and your team will also be engaged in the process, providing more input on the process. I will now like to turn to my dear colleague, Mrs. Espinosa, whom we consider around our circles as the mother of the UN75 process. And I also want to say that I'm going to go back to Michelle Griffin from the USG to ask for her reflections. So we're going to have to pack the last few minutes very quickly, because I know everyone has to leave at 10 sharp. Mrs. Espinosa, when you initiated this process nearly 3 years ago, it was clear to many of us that you were hoping to lay the groundwork for more profound changes at the UN. Arising from that process, we had a modalities resolution for the UN 75th anniversary of the UN. We had a political declaration agreed to by consensus. And now this Secretary General's report. What are your hopes for the next steps now? And what is emerging that seems to show the greatest potential to achieve your aspirations?
Well, thank you, Christina. And believe me, this what has happened, it really fills me of great hope and enthusiasm. And the truth is that I see this, our Common Agenda report, as a true tribute of the UN75 process and political declaration. And I say this because it truly honors the spirit of inclusion, of participation, and the genuine will to making the UN relevant for all, as was my motto when I was the president of the General Assembly, to make the UN relevant for all. And that was the goal behind the idea of commemorating the 75 years of existence of the UN. And I think that the OCA takes seriously the outcome of the global consultation and gives wings to the 12 commitments contained in the UN75 political declaration, so they become actionable. That's exactly what we, citizens, societies, together with governments that believe in the power and irreplaceable role of the UN, were expecting. So I don't have the time today, but I think that we need to rank and divide the more than 90 proposals. Volker was saying that at the beginning. What are content related? What are the principles behind the proposal? What are the functional and organic proposals that are made? And what are the means to actually achieve these goals and these principles? And I think that we need to have this, with great clarity. What are the objectives of the Common Agenda? Accelerate the achievement of existing commitments like the Sustainable Development Goals, to protect and manage our global commons, to ensure access to global public goods, et cetera, to ensure participation of civil society, of women, of young people. And here I would like just a little bit of a caution with indigenous peoples. They deserve an S in our Common Agenda. They are holders of collective rights, and that's the language of the UN. It's very important. Persons with disabilities, people of African descent, they have to be also part of the solution of the actions, but also part of our Common Agenda report. I think the ambassador of Sweden was so clear about the need to achieving gender equality, to counter the infodemic plague. I think that's prominent in the report, et cetera. I won't go into the details, but I think it's worthwhile also holding on very hard to the principles that are behind the report, that I think are as important as the proposals: solidarity, inclusion and participation, intergenerational equity, et cetera, a people-centered multilateral system. And these countless proposals, the high-level advisory board of former heads of state, the special envoy for future generations, the future labs, et cetera, the new agenda for peace, and so many other proposals. But I think that these proposals have to be connected to the summits that are proposed, the education summit next year, the summit for the future, et cetera. They have to be connected to the content, and I think it's extremely important that basically the summits are used to what President Turk mentioned. They need to be used to seal a human rights-based new social contract motivated by intergenerational justice. And for that, one important aspect are the processes themselves, not the summits, but the processes that they are going to unleash. And I think these are in my opinion, of great importance. And perhaps here, just to close, Christina, I mentioned the importance of indigenous peoples with an S, but also more clarity in the engagement and the very important role of the private sector, and also to go and to think beyond, to have focal points in UN programs and agencies for civil society. We do need a structural and profound shift to unmute civil society. And I strongly believe that we deserve a more profound, organic decision regarding a voice and the need for a built-in listening device within UN organs. In that, I think it's also a pending homework. So just to close, I think that the OCA is ambitious, rich, purposeful blueprint for a better future. And I think that we need to have a strategy. We need to use and activate the leaders for the UN75 that has been led by Sweden and Spain, but with many other countries like Costa Rica, South Africa, and others. From our side, the side of civil society, of citizens from around the world, we need to carefully assess the proposals and build a comprehensive follow-up strategy. We are co-responsible for the success and implementation of the OCA. And this is, I'm convinced, this should not be one more of the 400 reports of the Secretary General. The future of multilateralism, of the UN, of our societies and our planet depend on how we seize this opportunity for real transformation. I have been advocating for considering the UN part of our global commons. It's a human creation that is part of our heritage. So we are living extraordinary times, and I think that there is a need for extraordinary responses. The window is now open, and we have to put, as I said at the beginning, wings to the OCA so it can fly and fly far, to make the UN more relevant and multilateralism matter. And thank you, and back to you, Christina.
Well, thank you, Mrs. Espinosa, for ending us on a high note and for always providing us for even more food for thought. With this intervention, I'm finalizing the moderated part of the discussion, and I'm going to take advantage of the fact that Michelle Griffin, who is the policy advisor in the Executive Office of the Secretary General, is still with us, and I'd like to invite her to provide some reflections on the presentations that she has heard thus far. I know that some of you have submitted questions. I apologize if we're not going to get to them. We're getting closer to the end of the program, but I do want to emphasize that I acknowledge them and that this is just the beginning of the conversation, and we're going to have many more of this moving forward. So Michelle, if you could provide your reflections, and also if I may, as a moderator, take advantage of my role and also ask if you have any reflections maybe on what could be, because the OCA team has engaged civil society, has been one of the 4 tracks of the shaping the OCA report. And we are curious, of course, if there is going to be similarly or even more enhanced role for civil society moving forward in the follow-on process. So if you could also share some reflections on that, it would be wonderful. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Christina. And thanks to all the panelists, the ambassadors, and our civil society representatives, both in their current and former incarnations, for the very wise words. I have to say, it's Maria Fernanda, you're a difficult act to follow, but in fact, in this case, you did me a massive favor, because many of the points I wanted to make, you have already made, and much more eloquently than I would have done. So I've actually ticked off half of my list already before I even opened my mouth. So just to say, I really do agree with much of what you said and what our previous panelists have said about what the kind of follow-on process needs to look like, not just procedurally, but in terms of the kind of the vibe and the energy that we all need to bring to it. And I especially liked the idea of the report giving wings to many both new ideas and some ideas that have been around for a while, but maybe whose time has come. And I think that that's a great analogy also for kind of what we need to do next, because it really will take all of us working together, UN system, member states, civil society, to kind of allow these ideas to take flight and to continue to kind of gain the air and the amplitude that they need. Not all of the ideas will land equally well in every corner, and we know that. And I will say that we're right now in a phase of kind of listening and digesting how the report is landing in different constituencies. We're listening carefully, obviously, to the high level debate, listening carefully to you all today, to kind of really gauge which of these ideas might have the necessary traction to convert into reality. I mean, I think many of us have been through, major exercises like this before, but in some respects, I think we are at more of an inflection point than perhaps in any of our careers. And some of the ideas that the SG has put forward are very bold and will require courage on the part of member states, on the part of the UN system, but also on the part of civil society. I think Anna Karen is absolutely right. We have most of the tools, we need the will. This report tried very hard to avoid proposing too many institutional fixes to what are fundamentally political problems in how we work together to solve problems in the world today. And so I hope that kind of comes across. Danilo mentioned the fact that, it really is now the Secretary General has done what he was asked to do. He has put these ideas out there. It is in the first instance, of course, for member states to decide which ones they can embrace, but civil society needs to play its role. And I really encourage you to play your role in continuing to put pressure. Obviously, I know that there are some ideas in there that didn't go as far as some people expected, but I hope that people can see the big picture, that the huge vision that lies behind this report, the many constituencies and mandates and expectations that it had to meet and satisfy, the fact that it is the beginning and not the end of a process. And I would say in that respect, I think, the process of arriving at this report was incredibly consultative. As Volker said, we reached, nearly 2,000 civil society voices in 147 countries. We had a separate youth track. And I think that there's a lot that the UN system learned from the way we went about this report and the UN75 consultations that preceded it, that I think we are fully committed to continuing in our work. And so I would just say that let's not reduce this report or its importance to any one specific idea that may or may not have gone as far as certain people would like. And I mean, obviously, I know that the civil society champion idea didn't maybe, people are looking for more there. But first of all, I think Anna Karen made a very interesting point that I want to recall as being rather analogous when she talked about what a feminist foreign policy means. And it means every minister being accountable for gender equality, not making one minister accountable. And there is a real sense in this report, and I would encourage people to see that we we thought hard about the issue of civil society representation and participation in UN processes and the extent to which the Secretary General can shift that needle and put big ideas out there. And there's a real feeling that we need everybody to be accountable for civil society's participation in UN processes. And maybe making one person accountable isn't actually the best solution. So just to kind of encourage people to really, and there's a lot of content in there about making sure all voices are heard. And I heard Nodara very clearly call for genuine representation of perspectives. And I think you'll see in the report that there's a real attempt across the report to make sure that that is called for, and that we put in place the mindsets and the ways of working that should bring that, make that a reality. And whether that's, for instance, the SG's commitment to developing an age, gender and diversity policy for the UN system itself, or whether it's the repeated calls throughout the report for making sure that we are including and hearing a much broader range of voices. So I would certainly encourage people reading the report not to reduce it to any specific institutional proposals that you may or may not have been hoping to see, but to see the true spirit of kind of a more consultative, networked and inclusive multilateralism that imbues all of the proposals. And I think in that respect, Christina, to answer your question about civil society's role going forward, I mean, I think it's to see the positive, to see the big picture, not to reduce it to any of those maybe more specific proposals and whether or not they exactly met what you were expecting, and to keep up the drumbeat of pressure on those who will be slower to embrace some of the ideas in this report. For meaningful reasons. Not every member state is going to be equally comfortable with some of these ideas, but I think, the report represents a major leap forward in trying to kind of put these ideas out there into the kind of mainstream debates. And I think we are seeing already in the general debate and in the 10th of December launch, a lot of member states embracing ideas that honestly, over the course of my career, they would have not been as quick to embrace 10 years ago. So this is obviously evolution and not revolution, but it is an important step forward. And we need all of you in the trench with us, pushing for these ideas to be to become reality. And I look forward to working with all of you on that. Thank you.
And I believe that I can say that we can continue to work on the revolution, which started, maybe it's a different type of revolution, Michelle, as you're saying. Maybe it just started a couple of years ago with Mrs. Espinosa, and it's just continuing. And it's a revolution that is actually producing change, but is producing it maybe at a slower pace. And we're fine with that. I guess what we want to know is that we're for certainly going to get there. And I would just emphasize the fact that building on this momentum that was created over the past few years, of course, we don't want to lose it. And we want to make sure that we as civil society, C4UN, all the coalitions, all the networks that include scholars, academics as well, and many, many other non-state actors and stakeholders are continuing to be able to have their contribution to this process. Ms. Espinosa, I see that you have a point, and I'll let you do your two finger, and then I'm going to conclude the meeting. So please, the floor is yours.
Yes, and I'm sorry to apologies for requesting the floor just at the end of our dialogue, but I didn't want us to leave without doing something that I was entrusted by our coalition for the UN We Want and the Stimson Center to do. And I think that I wanted to say farewell to you, Christina, before you said your last words. Allow me to say that today is, I think, your last public event with us. And we simply wanted to say thank you. Thank you for your hard work, for your commitment, for your invaluable contribution to advancing the agenda for a more inclusive, effective, and network multilateral system. Thank you for putting your intellect and so many hours of the day to this cause. And since you are a woman that believes in words, but also in action, you are now going back to the ground, to where the UN matters the most, to serve MINUSMA. I heard that. You're going to be part of the UN peacekeeping mission in Mali. So just let us know on behalf of all of us, the ones connected, the ones from the coalition, we wish you the best in your new endeavor, and a big hug from all of us before your last words. And just back to you, dear Christina. We're going to miss you terribly.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Espinosa. This is a very touching moment and very surprising. And I appreciate and I'm grateful for the work that we've been doing. And I'll continue to be engaged and hopefully help from within the system and also help from the ground where my heart is at the moment. And this is why I've also taken this step. But let me conclude also by saying that also just to give a little bit of reflection and thinking back at the past and how we can create change. We know that we had the UN member states 2000 Millennium Declaration and the Secretary General's We the People's Report. And they built the case for the far-reaching 2005 World Summit outcome document, the UN75 Declaration and our common agenda and the 2023 Summit of the Future can lay the foundations for a revitalized and a better network to United Nations system. And I believe that the work starts now. Of course, it started a couple of years ago, but truly starts now. And it's of course incumbent on all of us to make this moment a turning point for multilateralism. I wish to express my special thanks to Mr. Volker Turk and Michelle for joining us and to our thoughtful speakers that were with us today for sharing their wisdom, their hopes, their reflections. And of course, thank you, the participants, for sharing this 1.5 hours of your time with us and for your active engagement during the session. Building on this discussion and on the GCAP's People's Assembly organized this week as well, we wish to convene again in an even larger format for the People's Forum organized by the Coalition for the UN We Need on October 19th. Mark the date, that's October 19th. With this forum, we aim to help forge a more coherent response from civil society to the OCA report. So colleagues should stay tuned and be prepared to be engaged in the future. And if you're looking to join another special UNGA side event, our friends from the Baha'i International Community, Civicus Together 2030 and others welcome you to attend the event Unmute Civil Society, which actually just started 3 minutes ago. So make sure that you join that, and maybe if there's a colleague in the room still around here, maybe they can share the link for that. Thank you once again, and please do enjoy the remaining UNGA high-level week. Thank you once again to all.